But I want to tell you that being 70 makes me to be the same age as a thing called apartheid, which was foisted upon us in 1949. I was born into a very different world. So when Dr. Nkulunkulu do a brief biographical background, I said it cannot be brief, but I shall be brief. It was a very difficult and a very different world, which was characterized by certain socio-political as well as spiritual realities. Remember that it was after the Second World War. Now you are too young to remember how it was to live through the war. But it was a tough time. But there's something that happened as a result of the Second World War. The American armies were all over the world. Now I'm teaching now. I'm not preaching, please. They were all over the world. And those who were Christians went back after the Second World War, and they began to realize that there is a world out there with huge needs for the gospel to be preached. And then in the United States, there was birthed a movement, the Bible College movement. Before that, there was no Bible college in America. But the Bible colleges were meant to take young men and women who were engineers in the army, who were doctors in the army, who were good riflemen in the army, to be taught and be sharpened to be let loose into missionary enterprise around the world. So the Second World War and thereof began a movement of the word of God being spread around the world. At the end of that war, there was an explosion of missions, and missionaries began to go all over the world. It's got its own dynamics, it's got its own problems, it's got its own difficulties, because there was a different kind of colonialism which was ushered into the world through the church. But in order for apartheid to happen, there are several things that had to happen. One, it was to capture the minds of the whites, and the church was a very strategic partner in proving the notion of the superiority of the white race and ensure the subservience of the black African population. So there was a two-edged sword. On the one side, the architects of apartheid had to make sure that they engender the spirit of superiority among the whites, that you should know that you are a chosen people. But at the same time, they recognized that they had to bring about subservience of the black population. And this was done by the promotion of a theology that is based on a serious distortion of scriptures, such as Romans 12. All images had to reflect success of white races and the black people who were happy to be able to continue being perpetual juniors. What we call perpetual juniority. Our laws in South Africa says a company is empowered when it's got 25%. And so a lot of the people who have had big businesses, they are very happy. Oh, no, we've got our blacks with 25%. That's perpetual juniority. That's a terrible law that, the Lord willing, must be changed. But it was very, very important to begin to make sure that the white superiority is promoted, while at the same time the subservience of the black community is ensured. The second thing that had to happen for apartheid to be successful, and I'm going somewhere, please stay with me. The second thing that had to happen was to capture all the institutions that promoted the advancement of the black dignity. Now, the problem at that time is that most of your schools, Fort Hare, the seminary in Natal, all these universities and high schools and schools in sub-Saharan Africa were run by churches. All of them. I mean, all of these churches were started by missionaries. The first printing press in South Africa was started by the Methodists. Okay? Now, government had a problem. What do we do? Because now the church has got this idea that we are all equal before God. So the next thing that they did was to capture and to say, missionaries, you no longer have the right to educate black people. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because in my own life and history, my father in the 50s stopped us from going to church. Because my father as a teacher was so disappointed that the missionaries, except by the way the Catholic Church, the missionaries, evangelical, Pentecostal, charismatics were not so powerful then like they are now. All of them gave that right up. And my dad said, how can you as a church abandon such a mission? And then he swore in 1954 that he and none of his children will ever step into a Christian church again. At that time, Verwoerd passed a law in Parliament, and this is the way he described it, the Bantu Education Act. It was called, and he said, ons moet die Bantus, that's how we were called, ons moet die Bantus terug naar die sterrimpies toe vat. Now, I know you don't speak in tongues, so let me help you out. Okay. It was saying, we need to take the black people back by a kokama peshu. Start a rimpi, start, you know. Hey, so that became the clarion call of the government in terms of black education. Now, in order to do that, and this is critical, they had to also go into the schools and begin to change the theological and biblical underpinnings which were used to educate the black child. Now that's very important, because later on in my life, God saved me in a miraculous way in spite of that situation that I grew up in. During this time, and I'm rushing now because I'm very mindful that some of you have lunch appointments. I hope none of you are going to the course. I mean the golf course. Some people say, oh, no, sis, I'm not available, I'm on a course. What course are you? No, the golf course. Oh, I see. I thought I'm phone, they can do it. But during this time also, something had to happen. And this is part of the Malay that we see in South Africa today. Have you ever wondered why we have Amakosi, are called chiefs? What is the African equivalent of chief? There's no such word. Aiko. But you see, the British decided that no. We cannot have King Edward and have other Hohakis calling themselves kings in the empire. No. And that is why that you had Umatanzima became the paramount what? Chief. So Amakosi had to be stripped down in terms of their position. The carriers of the conscience of the African child had to be diminished and reduce those people into chattels and subservient to the British king, the British monarch. But we need to go on. During that time also, they had to have legislation that converted black labor into workers and never owners. And this was undergirded by certain things, and I'm rushing now, by migratory labor system, which birthed dormitory towns, e.g. Soweto. I don't know if you know what Soweto stands for. Soweto stands for Southwestern Townships. But there's another very funny one, Soshanguve. You see, when the country was balkanized into Bantustans, then Buputatswana was supposed to be for Batswana, not for Sutus, so in the Soshanguve. Not for the Shangans, Sha in Soshanguve. Ngu nis Zulus, Ngu in Soshanguve. And Venda, Venda. So then now there was in the balkanized state a town which was set up called Soshanguve. I don't know if you see where I'm going. So the migratory labor system had to come up. Sibama kotuk. How to call umakarap. But also the DFIs and cultural institutions, DFI meaning development financial institutions, and cultural institutions that flourished and favored the advancement of the white population. If you look at the land bank today, and you look at towns like Stellenbosch University, out of which all of the prime ministers, by the way, since apartheid started, they all came out of Stellenbosch. Okay, and then Rao, Rwanda Afrikaans University. I don't know if you see where I'm going. Are you beginning to see why we've got the problems? Now, that is the context in which I was birthed in 1949.